Thank you for coming to listen to our presentation today, which will be on compassion-focused approaches in dementia. My name's Sarah Butchard. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist working in Mercy Care, which is in Liverpool, and I'm presenting today with my colleague.
Hi, I'm Matt Simpson. I'm an assistant psychologist and I work in the same service as Sarah.
So we are going to spend a bit of time talking through some work we've done thinking about how we can build compassion-focused approaches into dementia services. So I think really when we start to think about this, the first question is, what is compassion? And I think it's a word that we use a lot, but maybe we don't really think about what we mean when we talk about it. And when we're starting to think about compassion-focused services, what we're really thinking about is this way of relating to other people that is a sensitivity to the suffering that ourselves and others experience. But more than that, it is also with a commitment to relieve and prevent this suffering and this pain that people experience. And this kind of definition is one that is used both in more philosophical approaches, such as the Dalai Lama might talk about, but also in some more practical senses. So Paul Gilbert, who is a psychologist who leads a lot of work in compassion-focused approaches. And I think this kind of quote really sums up what human experience is about. That if you can sit quietly after difficult news, if in financial downturns you remain perfectly calm, if you can see your neighbours travel to fantastic places without a twinge of jealousy, if you can happily eat whatever is put on your plate, if you can fall asleep after a day of running around without a drink or a pill, and if you can find contentment just where you are, you're probably a dog. Because actually we all experience these difficult emotions. We all experience things which feel painful in life and which feel difficult in life. And that is regardless of what else is going on. So a lot of us might feel that more at the moment with the current kind of situation within the world. But actually we can also think a little bit later about how this relates directly to dementia. When we start to think about how we use compassion in the work that we might do, we think about this 3 circles model, and we think around the different things that impact on us as human beings. So as humans, we can feel threat. And when we feel threat, we feel like we need to protect ourselves, so we can behave in ways that are to protect ourselves from what we see as being threatening. We can also find ourselves driven. So we have goals, we have things we want to achieve, and we can find ourselves working towards them. And whilst that's not a bad thing, if we are doing that in a constant kind of repetitive way, it can become something that distracts us from just being in life. And ultimately, we all need to be able to soothe ourselves, to feel human connections and to feel safe in our world. And what draws together all of these elements of human experience is compassion. I think that this sums it up really nicely. That is, when you're faced with the pain of life, the threat system says, this is bad, I need to fight it or I need to run away from it. And we can all kind of think experiences of that. The drive system says, things will be better when I have that. So we work towards something, we work towards making things better. But compassion, which is intimately related to our safeness system, says, pain, I recognise you. This is how life sometimes is. I'll figure out what needs to be done to work with this and I'll bear it in the meantime. So it's not completely passive. It's not saying there's nothing we can do, but it is living with the experiences we have while we try to find the best way to address those. And I think that this kind of sums up the way that we might work with kind of compassion, and why we might do that is we kind of comes from a Native American story. So we have an elder walking along with his grandson. And when he turns to him, he says, I have 2 wolves fighting for their lives inside me. One's full of hate, anger, fear, and shame. And the other is full of love, warmth, kindness, and compassion. The grandson then kind of asks, which wolf will win? And I guess we can all ask ourselves that question, which we think would win from this. But the answer was the one that I feed. And I think that's really important because actually we can either think about the hate, anger, and fear and shame in our life, or we can kind of work with the warmth, the kindness and compassion that we feel. And a really key element of compassion is that in order for us to be able to experience compassion and feel compassion towards ourselves, we need to experience it from other people. I think that's a key element when we start to think about how this relates to dementia. So when we think about living with dementia, we know that dementia can be associated with high levels of threat, that we know that it can feel anxiety provoking for people, that situations which otherwise might not feel threatening can feel threatening, and that would stimulate that threat system that we talked about in the 3 systems model. Similarly, sometimes people are driven to maintain the way life was before dementia, so not accepting that some things might have changed, really striving, and actually that then can trigger that drive system, the kind of constant movement towards something that's hard to achieve. And this is all tied in with the kind of psychological needs of people living with dementia, which is the work that Kitwood kind of had talked around, and thinking about what those needs are, that we all need to feel attachment, we need to feel comfort, we need to feel occupation and inclusion. And if we think about how this might start to work in compassion and why they might link, what we're really saying is that people with dementia need to feel from other people a sense of warmth, a sense of kindness, but also helping people really think about what they need at a particular time, which might not be necessarily the same as what we want. So just to kind of illustrate that, if we think about someone who is living with dementia, and maybe it's at a later stage of dementia and is asking to see one of their parents, so they might be asking for their mother, and you know that their mother has is no longer with us, then actually you might say that what they want is to see their mum. But actually, is that what they need? Because often what we know someone needs in that sense is safety, security, feeling kind of reassurance. And so you might kind of think about saying, oh, feeling sympathy for that person and kind of saying, oh, that sounds really difficult. It's really awful that you can't see your mum. Or alternatively, you might think, I understand how that feels, but compassion would have an action focused on it. So it would help us think about how we meet the needs that that person is talking about. So if they're talking about needing to feel safe and secure, how do we help that person feel safe and secure? So I think that's why Matt and I thought that this really related to compassion and dementia, how they link together. And the first piece of work was done by a colleague called Marcia Mawson, who isn't presenting with us today, but this as her part of her doctoral thesis. And she asked carers about what self-compassion meant to them. And they all talked about there being a transition from their old life into the dementia world. And within that, they talked about there being an uncertainty about dementia, and that actually what they needed to do, what helped them feel compassion, was to accept that dementia is uncertain. And what made them feel more critical was when they tried to make everything safe and make everything feel as if it was before, when they couldn't. When it came to difficult emotions, it felt that if you were able to accept your difficult emotions rather than suppressing them and able to talk to someone about them, that really helped, as did having very supportive surrounding networks, whether that was friends, whether it was professionals, having people around you who support you and don't criticize you for sometimes getting things wrong, allowed people to feel kind of compassion towards themselves. And then finally, we found that the way people understood compassion really made a difference. So if people were able to see that it was important that they were good to themselves in order to support the person living with dementia, then they tended to be less self-critical. And that led myself and Matt to really thinking about what does compassion mean to people living with dementia. And Matt's going to talk you through what we found so far in relation to that.
Thank you. Lovely. Yes, absolutely. As Sarah said, so we had interviews with people living with dementia and carers of to really kind of piece apart what compassion means to them. And so we came up with a few different themes. And the first one here is about understanding of dementia. And this was a really cool element of needing to have an understanding, having a knowledge base of what dementia actually is, how that impacts the individual. The people who felt that if you didn't really understand what dementia was, you wouldn't be able to support them properly. The kind of physical or emotional, mental toll it can take on a person. So by understanding that, you can be compassionate and you can act and support on that. Next theme was about acceptance. And this was all about kind of twofold here. So for the carers, it was about accepting the situation, what was happening, the changes that were happening, maybe in their relationships with their loved one. And by accepting what was happening, they were able to elicit a compassionate response to that person. And then for the person living with dementia, feeling that acceptance, feeling compassion allowed them to feel accepted with those changes. And both that kind of acceptance, both the behalves, allowed them both to kind of help cope with the situation that was going on. So it's quite interesting. And then person-centered. So I just spoke about the first theme there was about understanding the dementia. This theme is very much actually understanding the person. You know, although they have dementia, they are not dementia. They still have, you know, the same goals, the same values as they had before. Nothing has changed in that respect. So it's about understanding the person, and that's really important. So once you understand the person, you can help support them better as well. One here is the practical aspects of compassion. So action. So as Sarah was just saying before about sympathy, empathy, and compassion, this theme is all about the action that derives from compassion. So physically doing things for another person, whether it's just asking if they're okay, giving them a call, you know, going out to the shop for them if they need something. It's about the compassion drives them to actually do something about it. And then the last one here is about human connection. So when we were having discussions with people about this, they often made the comparison between other types of elements like cancer. So comparing cancer to dementia. And often they felt that with cancer, people were able to approach them and connect with them and ask them directly about the cancer. So how was the treatment? You know, how are you feeling today about that? Compared to dementia, where they felt like there was a barrier of stigma about that. So people weren't able to, they felt like people weren't able to go up and ask, how is your dementia today? And so by having a compassionate approach, you'll be removing that stigma and being able to connect with that person without that barrier there. So I spoke a little bit about those themes, but I think it's important to see, talk a little bit about what they actually mean and what we can do about that. And we can kind of use those as building blocks to help develop, think about what compassionate-based service might be. So the first one here is about developing a supportive network. And that's all about immersing yourself with others that are accepting and understanding of what's going on. You know, as kind of Marsha said before, if you have a supportive network of people that do understand and care for you, you're able to be self-compassionate to yourself. You know, this supportive network doesn't have to be, you know, it can be professional, it could be families. And I know that often people with dementia find that their social circles get smaller. But that doesn't mean you can't form new social networks. Even this time of COVID, you know, it's a bit difficult with going out and everything, but we can still, there are still means to build that, you know, with peer support groups and things like that. And so think about how we can develop those supportive networks. One thing we can do is reduce the stigma. So as we said there about increasing that human connection, removing those barriers, is a way that we can kind of twofold show more compassion and improve that supportive network. And also, so services increasing understanding about dementia, but also increasing opportunities to know the person. And so this is similar to what Sarah was talking about before, how services need to be individually tailored. So they need to see a person as a person to be able to effectively support them. So, you know, as Sarah said, a compassionate service is not one that gives what the person wants, but what they need. And you can only get to know what the person needs by getting to know that person well. As well, if you think about interventions, how having that kind of theoretical underpinning of services with acceptance-based approaches and mindfulness, you know, interventions based on that are likely to be really helpful. So if you think about peer support groups for carers, we're in that kind of supportive network with other people, being mindful of, you know, the difficulties that there are, but also accepting what they're going through without any judgment, with compassion. And again, we look about what the action that compassion can drive, that can cause. So, you know, in the service where we work now, we have care navigators that call up and check people that live with dementia and carers off as well. So knowing that they're never alone, they've always got a base that they can touch base with. It will always be in contact. So it's about the action as well, what we can cause from that. And I know we spoken a little bit there about what services can do, but I think it's important if we think about what we can all do, you know, as a society. Even, you know, compassion can be the really small things, just asking how you are, you know, showing that human connection, asking what's going on. It can really just be the small things that really show that validation and that compassion, which can make a massive difference.
Thanks. And so I think, thank you for listening to us. We're more than happy for you to contact us if you want to. If you'd like to get any more information, please do. And we hope some of you want to get in touch. So thank you very much.
Thank you.